started a decarceration program that got review. It was devoted towards trying to get release of people who were in pretrial custody, get them released from prison, who had who were basically mostly overlooked by the system. Mm-hmm. So we developed a program to identify people worthy of release.
Host Melissa Rosenblum is one of only a few women certified by the Supreme Court of New Jersey as a criminal trial attorney. When you add kids, a booming law business, and a little black book full of subject matter experts, you've got the Mighty Merp podcast, and part 4 in this series. That's mightymerp.com.
Without going into all the crazy twists and turns in this case.
Right, because they can watch it on Netflix.
Right. They can watch it. We investigate. We eventually find out who rented the other cars. We start to investigate those folks, and we develop some pretty compelling evidence against one of the individuals who had rented the other car. A lot of background information and so forth. She also met the description of the getaway driver, very, very, very close to tail. But they had gotten the statement from Chester's friend, and that was extremely detailed. It was a kind of statement only someone who was involved from start to end would have been able to give. Mm-hmm. So what we didn't know, we didn't learn for 27 years was the night of the murder, there was a call made to the tip line, the anonymous Philadelphia police tip line, specifically identifying the woman who had rented one of these other. I mean, this was before the news of the murder had been reported. Mm-hmm. That night, while they're still taking statements, a call comes into the tip line identifying this other woman as having been involved with the crime with very specific details. That statement was buried in the detective's file and was never turned over for 27 years. That was the kind of statement that would have, I'm almost certain, exonerated him at trial. Because, there is no way for anyone to have known about this unless they had very specific knowledge of the crime and the person involved. They could not have called this tip in.
When you say it's buried, are you saying that the detectives knew,
correct,
or the district attorney handling the case knew?
The detectives knew. It was not in the district attorney's file. It was in the detective's file. They had this statement and never turned it over to the prosecutor. I mean, I can't say for sure they didn't know. The prosecutor didn't know, it wasn't told, but it wasn't in the prosecutor's file. It was in the detective's file. So my assumption is the detectives who knew they had coerced a statement, okay, and phonied up a statement, now come into evidence that it was someone totally different. And how are they going to explain this? How are they going to explain there's a tip identifying the person who actually rented the car that was used in the crime? How are they going to explain that someone in a different car who had nothing to do with the case gave a detailed, 6-page single-space statement with every detail the cops had about the crime in it? Mm-hmm. They couldn't. And the only explanation they would have to come up with was we had her sign a statement that she, never made. And they were, and at that point, they're not going to do that. They're going to protect themselves. So they hide the evidence of the actual perpetrator.
Why do they keep the hidden evidence?
That's a good question. I don't know, because I wouldn't have. If I was trying to hide my wrongdoing, I'd have just thrown that in the trash.
Right,
I don't know why they kept it.
I don't know.
I'll tell you, they kept it because I think, at the time, those files were not available to anybody. I mean, the defense never had a right to them. They were never being ordered to be turned over. No one was asking for them. They kept these files to themselves, and I'm not sure why they did. It's a good question. It's a very good question.
So then the question becomes, what changed? You said you worked on the case for about 15 years, right? You and the Innocence Project?
Wait, say that again. I'm sorry.
I said, you worked on this case for 15 years, you
Yes,
said? So,
correct.
so what changed?
So what changed? So that's a really good question. So that it's funny you say that because in the documentary, right, they asked me that. That's one of the key questions they ask. What changed? What happened? And I said, you know what happened? I said, not despite all the investigation we did, all the work we did, all the appeals we filed, all the newspaper articles, I got the Inquirer to write about this. I mean, we got a podcast. So much was done with this. I said the one thing that made the difference was Larry Krasner got elected and actually took this stuff seriously and actually hired someone who was prepared to fairly and honestly investigate it and look at it. And that's what made the difference. I said politics is what made the difference.
Right. Well, it's such a crazy thing to say. Politics made the difference because in the end, you do need somebody in an office like a district attorney's office to admit that a mistake could have been made. And nobody wants to do that when somebody.
No, the entire system is built on avoiding responsibility, denying mistake.
Right.
Like the entire, things have been changing a little bit, but by and large, our criminal justice system is built in a way to protect the result, no matter whether it's right, wrong, or otherwise.
And
it is designed. I mean, it's designed to protect, to protect the government's investigation, the court's decisions.
Right. But here's the thing, the argument from the state's perspective is we need finality. Our victims need to be able to have that finality. So we have to believe in it completely, right?
Well, but when finality becomes a virtue in and of itself, and there's and you fail to acknowledge that there are there's human error or worse, bad motive, which has been demonstrated. Okay, then you have I think then you have a system that is designed to fail and is designed to create injustice.
Right. I always say that there's this misnomer, this misbelief among people that are not involved in the criminal justice system that there's going to be a truth that comes out during trial, like
Correct.
TV, that aha moment, and there's no truth that comes out. There's
There's versions. There's different stories that are different versions, different accounts. One thing that this taught me, and you didn't. I don't think I needed this case to teach you, but it became this is very demonstrative of a phenomenon or the part of the culture of our criminal legal system, and that is that the police investigate a case. The police look for the truth to a point. That is, they try to figure out. They try to get an idea of who is responsible for a particular crime. Once they reach a certain level of confidence, they stop becoming detectives, they stop becoming investigators, and they start becoming advocates.
Right.
So their investigation then changes from a whodunit to how do we convict him.
Correct. It goes to their narrative. I always say that.
Yeah.
Once they start believing in the narrative that they've created, they only look at the evidence that supports their narrative.
And it taints how they investigate, it taints how they question, and how they treat people, and how they treat witnesses. They become an advocate for a conviction as opposed to simply investigators trying to get to the closest thing to the truth they can. And that clearly is what happened in this case. Clearly. I mean, obviously, this is an extraordinary case because they not only did they became advocates to the, in the worst possible way, which was that they coerced false evidence to build a case because they believed one piece of circumstantial evidence proved their case. They then proceeded to create false direct evidence of that conclusion. And, that is like the worst case scenario. And it's how you get innocent people convicted.
Right. And so the district attorney's office under Larry Krasnow agreed to review all the evidence. They're the ones who went
Correct.
to the...
Correct. He hired Patricia Cummings, who had run a similar office I believe in Dallas. And so she comes to Philadelphia. And I knew this was coming because I followed the election very carefully. Obviously, I had an interest in this because I had a client. I followed it very carefully. I paid attention to who he was hiring, and I followed the announcements. And I heard she was hired, and I checked with my colleagues. And when she arrived, I was there the next day with my petition and handed it to her. And I don't know if I was the first one online, but we were very close to being first online. So what happened next was, shortly after she arrives, she was acquainted with some of these Neflix producers because she had been involved in a case they had worked on in Texas, and they called her. They were doing this series, and they wanted a case where that had not been resolved and they could follow through the process. And literally, I had given this thing to her like a week or two before, and she calls me. She's like, "What do you think about this?" I said, "Are you kidding?" I was like, "Are you kidding?" I'm like, "I've been trying to do nothing but get attention to this case. Of course we would do this."
I'm jumping on top of the building, waving my arms.
Right. So I ran up to see Chester, and I said, "Listen, I'm not going to make this decision for you, but if you ask my advice, I think we should do this." I said, "It's going to be, it's going to expose a lot about your personal life and stuff." But I said, it all helps. And he was 100% on board, and they did the movie.
Right. And so they found the evidence, the hidden evidence or the buried evidence.
Well, I'll tell you, that was a great Perry Mason moment. So they retrieved the detective's file from the archives. They called me up to go over and look at it. And they opened the file. They gave me the file, put me in a conference room. I went over there with my investigator. We sit down, we split up two boxes. I pull the first file I pull out of the box, right? You can't make this up. First file I pull out of the box had that memo discussing the anonymous tip. And I'm looking at this in complete disbelief, And I gave it to the investigator. I said, "I'm not going to, just tell me what you think of this." And we looked at each other. And I said, the next thing we did was we both took an iPhone photo of it, because I didn't trust anybody at this point. Like, I may never see this again. So I said, "Take a picture of this." I said, "Send it to 3 of your friends and tell them to keep the picture." I said, "We'll explain later."
That's not just a Perry Mason moment. That's like a John Grisham.
Yeah, I was like, I'm like, I didn't trust anybody at that point. I was like, I am taking a picture of this.
Yeah, that's always, I have to say, I've never had it in that capacity, but sometimes, when you look at something and you're like, what do you make of this? Because you would just
I didn't want to,
yeah.
Right. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I'm sure I'm not understanding this. And I said, "You look at it and you tell me what you think." She looked at me with her jaw open, and I said, "Yeah." I said, there's the smoking gun. I couldn't, honestly, it was mind boggling.
Wow. And so, in the end, did
he got exonerated. He got an apology from the DA and from the judge, and he got out. And
how many years though? How many years?
28 years.
It's a
20. I mean, he had more years in jail than he had lived outside of jail by the time he got out.
And that's why when you watch it, you just cry.
It's really, I can't. I mean, I've seen it a few times, obviously, and I cry every time. It's just, they did a beautiful job with the movie, but I'll say that they did a great job with it.
So 28 years, and he's not the only one. He's not the only one.
No. There's. I think Krasner's office is exonerated. I don't know how many, 25 or 30 people since he's come in, which is about, I don't know, 3 or 4 people a year. And I mean, they have, I don't know how many, cases they're reviewing now, but lots. Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is the biggest misconception the public has about the legal system?
I mean, I think that there is this perception. I think you were right that, we get to the sort of the truth divining process. I think there's a perception that there's that's more trustworthy than it is. I think there's a perception that there's physical evidence, DNA and stuff is often the deciding factor much more often than it is. Most people are not exonerated from DNA; they're exonerated from discovering misconduct or hidden evidence and things like that. I think that there's a misperception about the power of identification evidence. I think that is probably one of the greatest bases for innocent people being in jail, being misidentified. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is this kind of popular view that, trauma leads to this like photographic event in your mind, which is
right.
really
which is actually the complete opposite.
Correct.
Of what the reality and truth
Correct.
is that
correct.
With trauma, the reliability actually decreases.
Exactly.
And that, yes, it's crazy. So are you still doing this type of work, Alan?
Yeah. So, I'm working on a number of, I've got a couple of appeals I'm working on now from cases from that era. Case from 1976, if you can believe it. There was some again, some undisclosed evidence of identification of an alternative person that had not been turned over. That man's doing life without parole, and so he's in his 60s now, and we just got the homicide file and discovered this evidence, and we're working on trying to get him a new trial and maybe get him out. I'm working on a number of civil rights claims for people who have already been exonerated. Mm-hmm. So those are in just very much the starting gate. Really incredible. All of these stories are sad and terrible. And you find out how much it's just there's a great deal of abuse and corruption, particularly in homicide investigations, and it's very disturbing. I mean, yeah, it's exceedingly disturbing when power is bestowed upon people. It can go the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, I always wonder if it's about just winning, like that sports mentality of win at any cost. I feel like when we were in Philly, that was definitely the motto of the district attorney's office at that time. Like you needed the win.
That's definitely a component of this, win at all costs.
Right. I always felt like and I could be wrong, I didn't work at a district attorney's office, so I've never prosecuted a case, but there seemed to be more advancement or career promotions for those type of wins and successes.
Well, that's true.
That's not how it was at our office. That wasn't a determining factor,
No, that's true. That's true.
So, you went actually back to the public defender's office after a short.
Yes. So I lived long enough and stayed in the business long enough that old colleagues, got ahead and got promoted and were hired to run the office. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to help in that process. And so an old colleague of mine who had become the chief defender called me to become the first assistant at one point. It was that's the second in command. And, I finally got to see if I could do all the things I said when I was just a simple assistant defender doing trials. I wanted to see if I could actually do the things I claimed I knew. I'd see if I actually could, when you're the, junior attorney, you're like, best for what's the office needs. And then
if I was running the office, this is how I would do it, and it would be
correct.
Yeah. So
I had that chance, and then so I did that for about a year and a half, and Even weirder turn of fate was the chief decided to resign or retire from the defender world. And I became the interim chief for about a year and ran the office.
So did you implement the changes that young Alan, that idealistic Alan would have done?
Let's just say I did some things, but I had made a commitment not to make any strategic changes to the office out of respect for whoever was going to take over eventually. I didn't want to send the office on a course. But I did some things. I mean, I certainly was able to hire attorneys, which was one of the more gratifying experiences and things I enjoyed a lot. We definitely did some. I definitely was able to implement some things. I started a decarceration program that got review. It was devoted towards trying to get release of people who were in pretrial custody, get them released from prison who had who were basically mostly overlooked by the system. Mm-hmm. So we developed a program to identify people worthy of release. I was proud of that accomplishment.
And people that were not yet convicted of anything? Yes,
correct. They were people who were being held on either high bail or had other things that were keeping them in jail, and were really not dangers. Were not people who really were dangerous and didn't need to be in custody. So they were escaping review for various reasons. And it was a program we started, which I was pleased about. But it was exceedingly gratifying and very interesting to, hard to believe. I pinch myself like, how am I in charge of this office?
It's a big office too.
It's 250 lawyers. Yeah.
So
you're
it's
very large.
Back in private practice.
Yes, back in private practice, criminal defense and civil rights stuff, and just running cases now.
So you went in, I would say full circle, but almost two circles now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I thank you for joining the Mighty Merp podcast. Before we end, I have fun questions for you.
Oh, the lightning round.
It is sort of like a lightning round. So we'll start with some easy ones.
Okay.
Would you recommend law school to your kids or to young adults now?
Probably not. Probably not. Except for my kids, I'd like to see them do something else. But
what do you do to relax?
What's that?
What do you do to relax?
What do I do to relax? Well, until this year, my son graduated, I was very involved in helping run youth baseball stuff. Which was a great distraction. So I did that, and now I've got to find something else. I'm not sure what it's going to be.
Are you an empty nester now? Is he going to college?
Yes, he just graduated high school, leaving for college. He's doing a gap year, actually, then he's going to college.
Oh, well, congratulations. I'm a year behind you, but my youngest, my baby, is turning 18 in 4 days, and I'm a little bit in denial about that.
Amazing.
Yeah. Are you reading anything right now?
I just had my summer week off. I read a book about Dan Shaughnessy, who was covered the Red Sox for the Boston Globe, wrote a book about it was a memoir of his final year. It was a memoir of him following his son in his senior year in baseball, which was what I just did. I was like, this is perfect.
Goodness.
I just read that. And during COVID, I went on a Civil War bender, so I've been reading various stories about Civil War battles.
That sounds dad appropriate.
Don't ask me why. Late Civil War interest onset.
Favorite movie?
Ooh, that's a tough one. My favorite law movie is The Verdict.
Mm-hmm.
Old Paul Newman movie.
Yeah, agree. Mm-hmm.
Down on his luck, Boston lawyer. Phenomenal movie.
Do you have a favorite baseball movie?
Favorite baseball movie would be Bull Durham.
Oh, that is one of my favorite. I like A League of Their Own too, though.
That's also very good. Now a series.
I know I haven't seen it yet. I do. I'm so exhausted by the end of the day. Anytime I try to watch something, I just fall asleep. It's kind of
I know.
sad.
Feeling. Yes.
So I always end with this one. It's such an easy one too. Favorite color?
Favorite color? Blue.
Everyone goes with blue. Ocean blue, sky blue.
I don't know. At the party, Yankees are blue.
There you go. Well, I like the Yankees too, so that's a good ending. Well, thanks again.
Thank you. This was an absolute pleasure to have this conversation.
I'm so glad we were able to do that today. And as you know, my office is in Atlantic City. Do you hear all the police cars and fire engines and ambulances?
Never a dull moment.
Never a dull moment. I'm going to escape my office before it gets dark here.
Very good.
All right. I'll talk soon. Thanks
all right,
again.
We'll talk soon. Thank you. All right. See you. Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this series. Don't forget to subscribe, because before you know it, we'll be back with another great conversation. Mighty Merp is available on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite apps and players. But the best way to experience the show is to visit mightymerp.com. That's mightymerp.com.